The first thing I heard was a woman screaming to get back, that it was going to blow. The second thing I heard was a man, not screaming in fear but in pain. There's a difference, and after 26 years volunteering with the fire department you learn to know it. Fear is high and sharp. Pain goes low and gets trapped, like it doesn't think it has anywhere left to go. I dropped my duffel bag on the sidewalk in front of the Dayton bus terminal and ran toward it. 2 hours earlier all I'd needed was a ride home. My name is Glenn Hartley. I'm 68 years old, a retired shop teacher from Dayton, Ohio, and for the better part of 3 decades I also volunteered with Greene County Fire. I mention the firefighting not because it makes me anything special. The men I served with held ordinary jobs through the week and ran toward smoke on weekends, same as me. I mention it because it's the only honest explanation I have for why my legs took me toward that crash instead of away from it. What I haven't told you yet is where I'd just come from. My wife Miriam passed on a Tuesday morning in late October, in a small hospice outside Louisville, Kentucky, where she'd spent her final 6 weeks near her sister Carol. The cancer had moved faster in the end than any of us had been willing to accept. For 14 months we'd managed it, rearranged our lives around it, found a rhythm with it. Then one Tuesday morning there was no more rhythm, just quiet. Miriam was the kind of woman who made every room feel intentional. She kept a handwritten calendar on the refrigerator with color-coded pens. She remembered the names of former students' parents 20 years after they'd graduated. She made cornbread from scratch on Sunday mornings and always burned the edges just slightly, and always said that was the best part. I spent 39 years watching her move through this world, like she belonged in every room she walked into. And I still haven't quite made sense of what it means that she no longer does. The service in Louisville was small, just Carol and the hospice staff, and a few of Miriam's oldest friends who'd driven down. I'd wanted it that way. The memorial in Dayton would come later, for the people at home. Louisville was for the people who'd been in the room with her. Neither of my children made it to Louisville. My son Tobias is 41, works in commercial real estate in Columbus. He called the morning after Miriam passed and said he was trying to rearrange a closing, that he was devastated, that he'd be at the Dayton memorial no matter what. I told him I understood. My daughter Stella is 38, lives in Cincinnati with her husband Reed and their 2 girls. She texted that Reed was traveling that week and she couldn't find coverage for the kids, and she was so sorry. I told her I understood that too. I say none of this to paint them as strangers. I say it because it's true, and because truth matters more than tidiness, when you're trying to explain how a family arrives at a certain moment. The morning after the Louisville service I packed one bag and took a cab to the Greyhound terminal. I'd decided against flying. Miriam used to grab my hand during turbulence, and I wasn't ready to sit beside an empty seat for 2 hours. Somewhere on the highway between Louisville and Cincinnati, I opened the family group chat. Taking the Greyhound back, gets into Dayton around 4:15. Any chance someone can swing by the terminal and grab me? I stared at it for almost a full minute before I hit send. Tobias answered first, "Bud, I'm still over in Columbus today, just Uber it." Stella answered 22 minutes later. "Dad, you really should have figured out transportation before you left. We have the girls' thing tonight." I read both messages twice. Then I typed 2 words, "Got it, no worries," put the phone in my jacket pocket, and went back to watching the flat Ohio fields through the window. The thing about being the person in a family who never complains is that people eventually stop checking whether you're all right. Not out of cruelty. Out of practice. You've said you're fine so many times that fine becomes the only answer they expect. After a while they stop asking the question at all. We pulled into Dayton at 4:09. I stayed in my seat while the other passengers cleared the aisle, because no one was waiting for me at the other end, and there was no use pretending otherwise. Outside on Commerce Street, the late afternoon was doing what downtown Dayton does on a Wednesday. Half empty, unhurried, ordinary. I pulled up the Uber app and was looking at a 9-minute wait when I heard the impact. A white pickup had run the red light at the intersection a half block east and hit a minivan broadside, and the force had pushed the minivan sideways into a food truck that was parked at the curb. The food truck operator, a man in his 50s, from what I could see, had been standing next to his serving window and got caught between the 2 vehicles from the waist down. The minivan driver was conscious but dazed, her foot resting slack on the brake, still pushing. People had their phones out within 10 seconds. Someone grabbed my sleeve, told me to stay back, that there was fuel leaking, and I should wait for emergency services. I pulled free and kept walking toward it. I've been inside enough burning structures to know the difference between a risk you can work with and a situation that kills you no matter what you do. This was a risk. The pinned man's name was Percy. I found that out later, at the hospital. At the time I only knew he was conscious, which meant his airway was open, and that the ongoing pressure from the minivan was the most immediate problem. I went to the driver's door first, reached through the open window, and shifted the van into park. The pressure eased enough that Percy's breathing changed. 2 younger guys had come up behind me without being asked. I put them on the food truck's rear bumper and told them to push on my count while I supported Percy from underneath. We got him clear. By the time I'd checked his legs for arterial bleeding, kept him talking, and helped hold pressure on the worst of the lacerations. With a jacket someone had passed me, the sirens were close. I sat back on the curb and let the paramedics take over. My shirt was torn at the shoulder. My hands were doing the thing they always did when the adrenaline started to let go. A fine, almost invisible trembling, like they were trying to remind me I was still there. An officer with a clipboard came over and asked for my name. Glenn Hartley, I said, 68. He looked up from the clipboard. You doing all right, sir? I told him I'd had worse days. He almost said something, then seemed to change his mind. A reporter from the NBC affiliate arrived while they were still working the scene. A woman named Angela Morse who introduced herself calmly and didn't push her microphone in my face. She asked if I had a moment. I told her I wasn't much for cameras. She said Percy's wife had arrived and was asking who had helped her husband. I said I hoped Percy's legs healed clean, and that was all I wanted to say on the record. She nodded and started to turn away. Then she stopped and asked one more question, almost gently. She asked whether my family was there with me today. I thought about the messages in my jacket pocket. I thought about the 9-minute Uber wait on my phone screen. They've got their own lives running, I said. Young families, jobs, responsibilities. I wouldn't expect them to rearrange everything for me. She held my gaze for a beat longer than I expected. Then she thanked me and walked back toward her camera. The city put me up for the night in a hotel on the east end of downtown. Clean beige, the kind of place designed for people who need somewhere to be without needing anywhere to belong. I set my duffel on the luggage rack, sat on the edge of the bed, and didn't move for a long time. There was a photo on my phone of Miriam from 4 days before the end. She was sitting up in the hospice bed with the window light behind her, laughing at something Carol had said. I don't know what, I never asked. I only know that when I look at it I can still hear her laugh, and I think that's probably the most I can hope for now. I fell asleep with the television off and the phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't hear it start buzzing around 10:30. Didn't see the missed calls from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Didn't see the text from Tobias's college friend Derek that said simply, "Turn on channel 7 right now." Tobias was loading the dishwasher when his phone lit up the 3rd time. He let the first 2 calls go. The 3rd was his old roommate Derek, who never called without a reason. "Just turn on the local news," Derek said. "I'm serious." His wife Leanne came in from the other room, already holding her phone out toward him. The footage was shaky, shot from across the street on somebody's iPhone, but there was no mistaking the figure crouching beside the food truck, the gray jacket, the way he moved. The same economy of motion Tobias had watched his whole childhood. He couldn't form a word. His throat had simply closed. In Cincinnati, Stella was already in bed when her friend Gwen texted a clip without any message attached, just a question mark. Stella almost let it go. Then she clicked it and sat straight up against the headboard. The station had cut to the brief interview. Angela Morse composed, asking her quiet question. They've got their own lives running. I wouldn't expect them to rearrange everything for me. Stella played it again, and sitting there in the dark with Reed asleep beside her, she realized she hadn't once, not once in the 4 days since her mother died, stopped to picture what that bus ride home had actually looked like for her father. What it felt like to step off a Greyhound alone in your own city, and know that nobody was coming. They used the spare key Tobias had kept on his keyring for years. They didn't call ahead. They just showed up at the house on Linden Avenue before 9 the next morning, the way they used to when they were younger, and this was still just home. Everything sat exactly as I'd left it. Miriam's reading glasses on the end table beside her chair, her cardigan on the hook by the back door, the mail still piled where I hadn't gotten to it. The house had the particular stillness of a place that's waiting for someone who isn't coming back. Tobias went into the garage to look for the broom. Stella started wiping down the kitchen counters because her hands needed something to do. It was Tobias who found the filing cabinet. It sat under the workbench against the back wall, labeled by year in my handwriting. The top drawer wasn't properly latched, and it slid open when he bumped it moving the broom out. The first folder he saw was from 2011. The first document in it was a bank withdrawal slip for $42,000, made out to Tobias Matthew Hartley. He sat down on the garage floor and started going through the rest. In 2011, I'd cashed out a supplemental pension account I'd been paying into since 1989. I told Tobias the money for his condo down payment had come from a county assistance program for first-time buyers. There was no county program. I didn't want that kind of debt sitting between a father and a son. I wanted him to come home for the holidays and look at me the same way he always had. There was a folder from 2016. 3 receipts from a fertility clinic in Cleveland, each one for a round of IVF. The combined total was a little over $62,000. Paperclipped to the back of the last receipt was a note in Miriam's handwriting. Stella thinks insurance covered it. Let her think that. She's been through enough already. Tobias was still sitting on the garage floor when Stella came looking for him. He held up the folder without speaking. She read the first receipt standing. She sat down beside him to read the second. She told me the insurance covered all 3 rounds, Stella said. I know. Mom told me directly. I know. There was a folder from 2019, the year Miriam's diagnosis came back in a different location. Inside it was a bill of sale for a 1967 Ford Mustang, sold to a private collector in Indianapolis for $38,000. I had spent 11 years on that car, the same car my father had bought the summer I was born. The same car Tobias had handed me tools for on a dozen Saturday afternoons when he was 12 and 13. Paperclipped to the bill of sale was a single index card in my handwriting. For M's treatment. No need to mention it. Tobias had been there for 6 of those 11 years. He'd helped me rebuild the engine the summer before college. He told me a museum picked it up, he said quietly. They stayed in the garage a long time after that. I drove home that afternoon through streets I've taken 10,000 times. The Tillman kid from 3 houses down had raked the entire yard without leaving a note. There were flowers on the porch I didn't recognize, and a coffee cake wrapped in cellophane, and 2 handwritten cards from neighbors I barely remembered speaking to more than once. Tobias was in the chair on the left. Stella was in the chair on the right. Neither of them was looking at a phone. I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, and we all stayed still for a moment. Then Tobias stood up and asked if he could take my bag inside. The last time he'd carried anything of mine, he was 15 and we were driving home from a fishing trip in Ontario. I handed it over. Stella had made coffee. It didn't taste quite right. Miriam had a particular way with the ratio. Something about the water temperature. And it's the kind of thing you can't explain to someone who didn't watch it happen for 39 years. We both drank it anyway. Neither of us said it was off, and somehow that shared silence felt like its own kind of grace. Tobias told me they'd found the filing cabinet. I said I'd expected that day would come eventually. He asked why I'd never told him about the pension fund. I told him that help isn't supposed to become a weight the other person has to carry. The moment you let someone know what you gave up for them, you've handed them a debt they didn't ask for and can never fully repay. I didn't want that between us. Stella asked about the IVF. I told her that was her mother's call entirely, and Miriam had been clear about it from the beginning. She'd said Stella was already carrying enough emotionally through those treatments without adding financial guilt on top of it. Stella looked at her coffee cup for a while. Then Tobias asked the question I could tell had been sitting with him since the garage. Why, when the reporter had asked whether my family was there, why hadn't I told the truth? Why had I let the whole city fill in their own story, instead of saying what had actually happened on that bus? I told him what I would have told anyone who asked. I didn't raise my children to be a story the public gets to judge, and whatever happened in those text messages on a Wednesday afternoon was mine to carry, not theirs to be punished for in front of strangers. Miriam never once believed in humiliation as a path to anything. She used to say that accountability should lead somewhere real. It shouldn't just leave people broken on the other side of it, with nowhere to go. Tobias put his face in his hands. Stella laid her hand on my arm without speaking, which was exactly the right thing. A month later, the Greene County Fire Department invited me to speak at their annual community event. I almost turned it down. Then I remembered something Miriam had told me more than once, that a story stops being only yours the moment it can help someone else find their footing in something hard. So I said yes. Near the end of the evening, someone in the back row raised a hand and asked what makes a person run toward something like that, instead of away from it. I told them the honest answer. After 39 years loving one person, fear stops mattering the way it used to. You stop calculating what might happen to you and you start asking only one question. Does someone need me right now? And then I told them the other part. The part I think about more than the accident, more than the filing cabinet, more than any of it. The real mistake most families make isn't one bad moment. It's 100 small delays. The call that gets pushed to next weekend. The visit that keeps getting rescheduled. The easy assumption that the people who hold us up will simply always be there, waiting, when we finally get around to showing up for them. Sometimes they will be, and sometimes the window closes while you're still deciding whether to open it. If there's one thing I'd ask you to do today, not think about doing, actually do, it's this. Call the person you've been meaning to call. Not after dinner, now. And ask yourself honestly, is there someone in your life who has been quietly setting things down so you could pick them up, and never once mentioned what it cost them? I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Leave a 1 if you think I was right to protect my kids in that interview. Leave a 2 if you think the full truth should have come out. Leave a 3 if you're still sitting somewhere in the middle, the way I am on certain nights. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. It always means something to me, to know who's sitting with this. Because the thing Miriam understood, in 39 years of loving a quiet man, is that the weight a person carries without complaining doesn't disappear when they stop. It just waits, in a filing cabinet under a workbench, for the people they love to be ready to see it. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.